Welcome to today's episode of the LangFM podcast. This episode is not about interpreting and not really about translation, maybe a little bit later on. I have a guest today who joins us from Brussels, but actually comes from much further away, and we'll explore that in a moment. Welcome, Mathew Lowry, to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You are joining us from the offices of Euractiv today.
Yeah, I'm doing some part-time work with them, so they gave me a little bit of time to step into a corner. It's a very difficult day today. I don't know when people are going to listen to this, but this is the day that Brussels was bombed at both the airport and just down the road here at Malbec. So it's a pretty strange atmosphere right now. But yes, I'm in a little corner at Euractiv right now.
Yeah, it is very much a weird day today, 22nd of March, and a lot of upheaval in the city, but we'll try to focus on the topic at hand.
Sure.
So maybe to start the podcast, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mathew?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm Australian, for a start, a British Australian, and I turned up in Brussels back in the beginning of 1991 as a freelance science journalist. I was backpacking around Europe, and I sort of just stayed because I found myself writing about the research programs, the early research programs of the EU. And I've been here ever since, really. I did jump back to Australia for 1 year during the .com because I started building websites in 1995, and I've had a few successes in that front. I've been building websites since then and doing online communication strategy, general communication strategy, innovation strategy, and that sort of thing. Mainly around the EU institutions, but I also do some work with private clients, and as I mentioned before, I'm doing a bit of work on media innovation at Euractiv. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Okay. So your professional background is basically in journalism or more in technology, or?
I did a degree in theoretical physics. That is useful. Wow, okay. That is useful to what I do now. Well, who knows? I don't know. Well, it's part of what I did. But from that science degree, and I realized during that degree that I was never going to become the next Richard Feynman or anything. So I always liked writing. So I became a science journalist, but not an officially trained journalist. I just became a science journalist because I could write about science.
Because you know what you were talking about.
Well, it helps, but being a science journalist is its own toolkit. You sort of, obviously I could write about physics a bit more easily than I could write about biology, but a science journalist it's a particular type of journalism, and it's all about understanding how to ask the right questions and then try to figure out how to explain something which is full of jargon and is understood only by insiders after many years of study. That's what science communicators do. But then that transfers really easily to communicating about Europe, because Europe is really important.
Yeah, that was a great segue.
It was, wasn't it? And I've used it. Here's a tip. I've used it before. I've actually blogged about the links between writing about science and writing about Europe, communicating about science and communicating about Europe, to be more correct. But yeah, because everybody knows that Europe's important, everybody knows science is important. Nobody understands either of them unless you spent several years studying it. It's full of jargon, insider.
That's exactly right.
There's lots of bubbles, etc. So the same techniques do transfer. So I started writing about science, then European science, and then, Europe. And just as I can, I occasionally find myself doing some science writing about genetics or software security testing. I'm doing something on that right now. I find myself communicating sometimes about regional policy, which I have no background in regional policy. But if you know how to ask the right questions and then explain stuff, knowing who your audience is and, knowing how you should structure it and the sort of content you should be using and how you should write it, then the skills do transfer.
And you're probably no longer an EU outsider because you've been here for so long, but I suppose your initial perception was one where you were intrigued and you were kind of interested, and that was what prompted you to stay here. What is your general impression of the EU's development over the last decades? How do you perceive the changes that are going on, maybe in general, or also from the point of view of technology and communication, which is your forte?
Well, that's a big question. Generally, I'm really worried about the EU, and I guess everybody who thinks about it is. It's the whole thing. Sometimes you think the whole thing could unravel. And I'm not talking about the terrorist threat at all. I'm talking about internal divisions. if things go the wrong way, the whole thing could sort of slowly unravel. And I'm really bothered by that because, I may be Australian, a British Australian, but I have a Belgian wife and two Belgian kids who went to Belgian schools. And so I'm a bit part of the Brussels bubble, but I'm also, a Belgian resident with Belgian friends. I live in Belgium, pay Belgian taxes. Yeah. So, I don't really relish the idea of the whole thing falling apart. And I'm still here because I just find it, from a communicator's point of view, communicating Europe has to be one of the most challenging, difficult problems you could ever ask for. And it's also a really worthwhile problem because the EU is fundamentally, I'm reasonably fundamentally for the EU. I think it could be reformed enormously perhaps, but I'm not quite sure how.
Sure, yeah.
But, it's better than what came before. And one of the key problems that we have here is the lack of EU public sphere, an EU public space. And so that's a fundamental problem with the functioning of the EU as a democracy. And so that's a good problem to work on. You can spend an entire lifetime on that sort of problem. It is so multifaceted. It's so complicated. There's no one solution. There are so many different solutions, and there's so many difficulties facing it. I guess that's why I'm still here, really, because it's a good, hard problem. It's what you call a wicked problem or a complex problem. There's no easy solution. Yeah, exactly. There's no easy solution. And anybody who says they've got an easy solution to this is, simplifying to the point of foolishness, really.
And we see quite a bit of that, unfortunately, at the moment. People promising the easy solutions where there aren't any easy solutions.
Yeah, you have to always really deploy a lot of skepticism when you come along. You hear somebody saying, "I've got the solution to this problem." No, you could have that in physics. You won't get that in anything more complicated than chemistry. I mean, and politics is several orders of magnitude more complex than chemistry. And so you just don't have one single solution. But, it's really fun to try to find a way of pushing forward one small part of it. So most of the time I've spent here, I've been pushing forward, certain ideas and trying to help make, the EU's online presence more understandable and more relevant and easier to understand and to reach. And that's a problem which has had several revolutions over the last 20 years. It's been revolutionized several times, first by the web, then Web 2, then social media, and it will continue to be so. But I guess I'm here working at Euractiv part-time because, I'm more and more understanding the crucial role that the media have to play, and the fact that we don't have a European media space is really, really critical. So that's the sort of one of the focuses of what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, and I think there's the one problem that we've touched on already, which is the technicality of the EU. I mean, the EU in general is active in so many policy areas right now that it does get very complicated, and it's so much more than just a single market. So that's one point. And then, of course, there's the whole aspect of the multitude of languages that we have on this beautiful continent, which makes things complicated, interesting, challenging, terribly complicated, depending on your point of view, I suppose. So for you, coming from a rather monolingual country, I would assume, what's your take on that? Do you see it more as a challenge in the positive way, or could it be something that just holds us back? Should we all just switch to English? There, I said it.
God no. I know I'm the last person who'd ever say that, simply because I'm an Australian. I hardly heard a foreign language spoken as I grew up in Adelaide, South Australia, and so I came to Brussels with a tiny amount of schoolboy French, which I haven't improved much since then, to be honest. So I hate the idea of being that guy that English guy who suggests everybody should just speak English. Now, multilingualism is one of actually, I've got a special name for multilingualism. I call it the meeting killer. Whenever you're in, whenever you're in a meeting talking about a website or an online communication strategy, and when multilingualism comes up, that's the end of the meeting. You won't get off that topic until you run out of time. It will always consume everything.
As a challenge for web, that's absolutely true. Yes.
But, I mean, this is one of the most interesting projects I had. I did spend a few years inside the Commission, and one of the more interesting projects I did then was an online architecture for Europa, which allowed for feasible multilingualism within the resource constraints at the time. And
sorry, Europa being the official website of the EU or the European Commission for those less in the know, maybe.
I'm really sorry.
No, don't worry.
You're absolutely right. I fell into my own trap of using jargon. So exactly. And that's, that was a really interesting aspect of that project. And that was back in 2001, 2002. And since then, I've been really fascinated by multilingualism because around about the same time, I also built my first Web 2.0 website, interactive website. We didn't know to call it Web 2.0. That term only came a couple of years later. But it was, basically an online community of practice built around a European Commission research conference where people could actually co-create the conference content. It was quite a lot of fun. People could register, create profiles, submit blog posts, comment on each other's ideas, etc., in order to figure out, what they would talk about at the event. And that was great. And luckily for us, we did it in one language because it was a research program, a European Commission research program in information and communication technologies. And, these research programs in the world of science, everybody does speak English. It is accepted that you can't have an international research program operating in 24 languages. And that's very fortunate for science. And I would hate that lesson to be adopted by all other aspects of society and we all just go to one language because, I love Europe. I'm here for a reason. A lot of people say, "Why are you here? Australia is fantastic." And I said, "No, I actually went back to Australia, and I came back here because I prefer to live here." And one of the reasons I love the cultural diversity, and you can't divorce cultural diversity from linguistic diversity. But Absolutely. What's really interesting is that Europe should actually be the most innovative place in the world, because if you've ever looked at innovation studies, you'll find that one way of making a project team or a group of people more creative, more innovative, is to make sure that the people in the project team are diverse, men and women, old and young, and also people who speak different languages, come from different cultures. Because when you speak a language, and I guess you know this a lot better than I do, mate, when you speak a language, it gives you a framework for tackling a problem. And there's been a lot of studies showing that people who have been brought up bilingual or trilingual are actually better at problem solving. So why is Europe not solving its problems? We've got 28 different countries, but many, many more cultures and many languages. If we could tap that innovation potential, which is represented by all those people speaking all those different languages, if we could somehow use that innovation potential, we'd be really innovative. But we're not. And that's because that same diversity that gives us that innovation potential also stops the ideas traveling from one person to another because they come in different languages, and so people don't understand each other. And so it's like this great untapped potential. And that's what I find really interesting about advanced language technologies these days, that they could both allow Europe to maintain its cultural diversity and actually benefit from it, and actually use that culture, sort of tap that cultural diversity to tackle problems in a more innovative way, without forcing everybody to think in English. Because you don't just speak in English, you think in English. And
sure.
If we could, I don't know, if we could tap the innovation potential, I'm sure Europe could do great things. But we need to tackle the language barrier first.
I think that's the interesting problem of how you can tap into that potential. And I think that also pertains to the question of this European public sphere, the European demos, or whatever you want to call it, is what we're trying to achieve. So, I mean, apart from the multilingual environment and multicultural environment that we have in Brussels and the institutions, I mean, the idea is also to have a common sphere for discussion, a common demos where people talk about European issues, and not only from their national point of view, but also sort of from a European point of view. But that's exactly, I think, the difficult point that we're trying to achieve.
That's exactly one of the focuses of one of the projects I'm involved in fact, because people vote and consider, and European issues from the national perspective. You know, what can my country get out of it? How can my country avoid this problem, or get more money from Brussels or whatever? And
we see that right now with migration, for example.
exactly.
And it was the same with the financial crisis and so on.
It'll be the same forever. And, you know, I think it's a pipe dream to think that we'll all just become European and not have national politics. That would require that level of homogenization, which would be just horrifying. Europe would become like a cultural desert, and I can't have that. But, there's got to be a way where people can see, perhaps in their national conversations, get the perspective from other countries, get the European angle of this discussion, and see how other countries are viewing the same problem as well. And so that's why it's so interesting to work, you know, with media style projects, because you've got these national media, and if we can find a way of getting national media to reflect the debates that are going on in other countries a bit more, that could help. It's probably a better way forward than simply the European Union institutions trying to become a media in their own right. Because, you know, Europol TV and other projects like that, you can see that they've tried to become a media, but, you know, the media business is incredibly difficult. It's not the most obvious thing in the world. And when you come at a consumer saying, here's a media brought to you by an institution, you're going to have a bit of pushback on that.
A bit, yeah. Quite a bit.
And people have got enough media. You know, there's an awful lot of content out there. And a lot of media are under enormous pressure. I mean, the media business is under an incredible strain right now. Has been. Their entire business model is buggered, basically. And so, you know, asking them to create the European public sphere is, they're having difficulty surviving. So, you know, one can't ask too much. But I think it's still a better way forward than trying to replace them.
And I think, that was an interesting point you mentioned there, because even presumably very close neighboring countries like, let's say, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, they don't really know an awful lot about each other, I think, interestingly, and not even to speak of what Austria's take on EU affairs is, as opposed to German take on EU affairs, that kind of thing. So maybe there really is a good point for starting there, and not just having, this is the national level, this is the EU level, but also, you know, learning more about the other EU countries. But my impression, at least from the media that I consume, is that there's, I don't know if it's a lack of interest, lack of resources, or whether people think that nobody is interested in that, nobody would watch that, you know, to just learn more about just neighboring countries, quite simply. Yeah,
I mean, we are getting a bit more of that, but it's always in the framework of crisis and catastrophe, you know. There is more coverage of EU issues than there were, say, 5 years ago. But at the price of the Euro financial meltdown and because of the refugee crisis in Syria and so forth, you know, this is a heavy price to pay for the limited amount of extra coverage that we're currently seeing. So, you know, people know a bit more about how Hungary deals with refugees than they would have known 5 years ago. You know what I mean? There is a bit more coverage, but there's not nearly enough to really constitute a proper European discussion about this. And it's still very much seen from that national lens. And it's, you know, just translating content so people can see what's going on in another country is not enough, as you said, because you don't have the context. And this is extremely difficult. Like I said, this is a wicked problem. And I know I've been fascinated by, you know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, back in 2002 when I launched that first sort of online community website for the Commission in English only. And at the same time, I was coming up with this other architecture for feasible multilingualism for Web 1.0. And then I started thinking, how do we put this together? How do we have online communities? Because this is one way forward. This is a very powerful way forward for the EU institutions to help online communities emerge of people who are interested in the same topic but in different countries. So this has to be, you know, interactive spaces, online communities of practice, which are multilingual. So you have people in Germany and Netherlands and France and Italy who all happen to be interested in, as you said, managing refugees or helping refugees cope. And, you know, they could learn a great deal from each other But how do you build that sort of space which gets over the language barrier? Because it's hard enough building a Web 1.0 site in many languages. But when people can submit their own content and comment to other people's content in 24 languages, how on earth do you do that? So that's been consuming a lot of my time, well, for over 10 years now, because that's a wicked squared problem. That's great.
But I mean, there would probably be quite a few people who say, well, it's easy. You just use Google Translate. I mean, Google Translate or Bing Translate or whatever is already available on Twitter, on Facebook. I mean, it gives you varying quality in the results, but wouldn't that be good enough?
It's not good enough. We've tested it. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, I helped, in another life, I helped conceive sort of a multilingual strategy for this sort of thing. It was a commissioned platform for adult education trainers, people who are professionals in the field of adult education, and they wanted a 24 language online space, and so we came up with a very sophisticated multilingualism strategy, because you need to both have, it's what you call blended translation, where where people may say, to begin with, they may just be presented with a machine translation, and there's a message saying this is a machine translation, and you can actually then ask people to vote, if you like, for it to be post-edited, to be improved by a human translator. And so you get all these signals. You get people voting for stuff to be translated. After seeing the machine translation, they say, yeah, this looks pretty interesting. I'd like to see a human translation of that. But you also look at traffic and how many shares it gets. You get a whole bunch of different signals to be able to figure out how to deploy your human translators to improve the quality of the translation. And you can also divide a piece of content into parts. So the text in the opening paragraph, for example, gets translated, and the rest does not. And then people say, well, based on that summary, I'd like the rest to be translated, please. But, if you just say everything gets machine translated and that's it, you won't get the conversation that you want, because you build these online communities of practice to help people not just discover each other's content, but to discover each other, because behind every piece of content, there's somebody who wrote it and somebody whose insights might be useful. But you need to reduce the barriers for them to discover each other. So it's not just content discovery, it's sort of person discovery and network forming. And we tried just using machine translation systems, and the result just wasn't good enough, because these are highly technical subjects. Each community of practices is about a topic which is of great interest to a small number of practitioners, people who are really into it. In this case, it was, adult education. And machine translation is good at general stuff, but it's not good at the specialist stuff.
And I think the problem is also that not all languages are equal in terms of machine translation, because I mean, the problem, at least with Google Translate, is that it's usually works with English or via English. So sometimes, it goes through several hoops, basically, until it comes out in the final language that you wanted. And of course, that can create problems. And it usually works best with, well, obviously English, then Spanish, maybe German to some extent. But if you have a language like, say, Maltese or Estonian or maybe even Hungarian, I don't know, you would get far worse results, I would assume.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But, this is all sounding very negative, but it is just a question of time. Google Translate is, it's the system that it is. There are other systems out there. And the thing about these systems is that you can train them. You can feed a translation engine. If you have lots of content in many languages, you can feed that content into a translation engine and it will get better. So, for example, the Commission has its own machine translation system, because they've been translating content, human translating content, for years and years and years. All European Union law, lots of stuff translated. They've been, as far as I understand it, I don't know them, they've been using this body of text to train their own system. And as a matter of fact, Euractiv has actually been given the permission to actually experiment with this tool, MT at EC it's called, within the Euractiv network, because Euractiv has about 12 franchises around Europe, and they exchange content, translate each other's content to widen and deepen their coverage. And they've been testing this tool over the last year or so, which is one of the things we were discussing at Future Media Lab a couple of months ago, and they're going to be discussing this again at Language Technology Innovate, the conference coming up in May, where I will also be speaking about my project. So these tools are there, and they're getting better. And the news from Google is that they're really getting into deep learning. You know, the same technology that was on show recently, AlphaGo.
AlphaGo, yeah.
So that's deep learning, machine learning based on neural networks, which was the big trend when I was at university and beyond into the 90s. And then it sort of fell away because people said, this doesn't work. It just turns out that they didn't have enough processing power. They didn't have enough data. But now they do, and AlphaGo is based on that. And the potential for machine translation is only going to get better. The key is to feed these engines with good content. And if you're trying to build up, an online community for adult education experts, you need to feed the system with content about adult education in multiple languages, and then it will get better. And what things get really interesting is if you create a community like this, and then it uses the machine translation engine, and then members of the community correct the translation. Now, not only is that something which you can engineer that into the way community is built, you can reward people for doing that, and you can build communities so that people are motivated to do that. But one of the motivations is that when a human improves a machine translation, the machine can learn from those corrections and it gets better. So if you can imagine you set up a community which is, got lots of people from around the world all focusing on a particular topic, and you say, you can share content into this community, and the machine translation will make it available to everybody. And if they improve it, if they edit the translations, it actually improves the engine, and that benefits everyone. So you could actually crowdsource the training of these machine translation systems. And that's, I think, gets really interesting, because then you can end up with a different machine translation engine for every online community in Europe.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the first fruits now of a very interesting progression, because, machine translation is actually a very old dream of engineers, I guess. And first they were trying to, teach language rules to a machine, to a computer. And that didn't get very good results. And that's why a lot of people are still laughing about machine translations when maybe they shouldn't, because then the next big step was, I think it's called statistical machine translation.
Yeah, that's the basis of Google Translate. That's what Google Translate is based on, statistics.
But I think many people are not necessarily aware of that. So the thing is that you feed the machine or the system a lot of material that has already been translated by human translators, interestingly. And then the machine sort of takes that and applies principles of statistics and uses that to suggest translations. And the next step now is, these neural networks and an artificial intelligence, where the computer can then not only apply statistics, but also actually learn something and improve itself, which I think was also what happened with AlphaGo, so the AI system that beat kind of the best Go player in the world by playing against itself for a few years, and then being able to beat the best human Go player. So it's very interesting to see that progression now and bearing fruits, bringing concrete results.
Yeah, like I said, it's only going to get better. Have you ever played with Microsoft's system, which is built into Skype, where you can speak your language, words in your language into Skype, and it will recognize what you've said, translate it, and speak it out in another language to the other person on the call. And
I played with it a little bit. Yeah, what they call the Skype translator.
That's right. Yeah. What did you think of that? I shouldn't be interviewing you, I guess, but as a professional interpreter, what did you think? What was the result like?
In terms of quality, it's nowhere near good enough. But I must say, when they showed the first demo, I must say I was quite impressed. Because sure, it can't replace a human interpreter right now. But when I saw the first demo, I was quite impressed with how far they'd come with that. And the way it works is that it basically does speech to text. So it listens and then transcribes that into text, does machine translation on the text, then shows the translated text, because you hear and you see your conversation partner, and you also see the text, which is interesting. So you can sort of verify. and translates that and does text to speech. So that's kind of how it works. And I think it's a very interesting approach, and I'm very curious to see how much better it can get, or if it maybe levels out at some point. I'm not really sure. But as you said, I suppose AI will make it much better. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. The key question is whether they can build into the system a way of people to improve it. It's like Elon Musk with his self-driving cars. The thing about the self-driving cars is that obviously a human is behind the wheel and can correct the car. If the car decides to swerve off, the human can take control and take control of the car and correct whatever the car did autonomously. Every time a human does that, the algorithm learns. And that learning is shared from that car to all of the other cars on the road. So he's built a system which is not just a good system for driving around, but it can be trained and is being trained by the people using it. So it gets better and better and better. And that's the way these technologies advance, not just by relying on the brute force of engineering, but coupling users into the equation, into the process, so that humans can improve the system. Because they are motivated to do so. You're motivated to correct your car when it's heading towards a brick wall. And in the process, they happen to improve the algorithm so your car won't send you towards a brick wall tomorrow. And everybody benefits it. So you get this massive crowd improving your system. And once they crack that, then, yeah, I would expect to see a lot of progress in the next 5 years. You should read an article with the guy who invented this neural network, so I'll tweet it to you later.
Sure, I'll put it in the show notes, so everybody can read it.
Cool, I'll send it to you later.
What I found most amazing, just to wrap this thing off then for the cars, is that the Tesla wasn't marketed as an autonomous car. It was marketed as an electric car with an electric engine. And then just by flipping a switch, they updated the software, and suddenly the car was able to steer itself, which I found quite amazing.
And it's software that learns from the human driver and then updates all of the software. So the only risk I think here is if somebody learns to hack into it, but that's a completely different question.
Yeah, which, by the way, has already happened because I think the Tesla software uses an outdated browser. So they found a loophole already.
Internet Explorer.
No, it's kind of an old version of WebKit, yeah. But I wanted to get back to the LT conference because you mentioned that earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And I was kind of following that. Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about what the conference is? I mean, it's largely about language technology, but maybe you know a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, I guess the full name, Language Technology Innovate Conference, tells you what it's about. But they've got a particular conference structure where people come forward with things like a buyer's challenge, like, I've got this problem and I challenge the industry to find me a solution. And so I've got one of the buyer's challenges for my project, hashtag platform. And so I go, I basically answered a call for proposals saying, here's a problem that I'd like to solve. I've got an idea of how to solve it, but I need the technology. And so the organizers are currently sort of pitching this idea to all of the technology suppliers who are coming to the conference, and they're trying to match us up. And I'm speaking on the second day about that, and hopefully there'll be a workshop with a few technology suppliers, and we'll have a nice open discussion about this. And a few hours, I think just before me, and in the same room, some colleagues at Euractiv are going to be talking about Crosslingual, which is a project which they've been involving for many years. And I don't think they've got a buyer's challenge. They're a bit more advanced, a lot more advanced. They've got a different sort of conference item type, where they've got a very clear vision and they're trying to recruit more people to join it. And in fact, there'll be, I think sometime in the next couple of weeks, they'll announce it formally, so I can say it now. As a media, they're actually going to be issuing their own sort of call for proposals for other European media to join them in building a pan-European media network where we integrate machine translation into a sort of a peer-to-peer network so that the media on the platform can share each other's content using machine translation and semantic analysis and things like that. We were talking about this at Future Media Lab. So I'll send you the link, you put it in the show notes. So basically there are two really interesting projects I'm involved with at LT Innovate. this May, and they're both fascinating. And what's really interesting is they use exactly the same technologies, but completely different ways, utterly and completely different ways. So go figure. There's a lot you can do once you put a few different technologies together. You get a lot of different combinations.
And can you describe a little bit your bias challenge, or will that have to be kept secret until the conference?
No. I've already written a blog post about it. I published the challenge that I put into the call for proposals when they approved it. So it's a little bit. We've already touched upon it. Actually, I snuck it in there. It's the idea of building a platform where people could form an online community, and it's specifically an online community for people who are interested in a particular topic and want to bring people together in different countries speaking different languages who are interested in that topic. So it's a platform for creating a community of practice or community of interest. And such platforms already exist. There are many platforms like that. But they don't really tackle multilingualism at all. None of them do. If you know anything about building communities, online communities, one of the tools that you need to offer a community is a really high-performance library, a place to put useful resources. So, you might be in, give me a topic, it could be butterfly collecting or whatever. People will, if they see something that is useful to the community, they like to share it, and so they put it into the resource library. But they'll be putting it into the resource library of the community in the native language. So a German butterfly lover, sees an interesting article about, the use of pesticides and the impact on butterfly populations, and it's in German. So he puts it into the library, and at the moment, only German speakers can see that, right? But if we're going to build this tool so that it's machine translated automatically into the other languages using a multilingual taxonomy, so that if you're a butterfly lover interested in pesticides from France, you'll actually see this article because you've navigated the community using, your French taxonomy, and you find a French translation of this German article. And then you can improve that translation if you see that there's problems with it, and that will actually train the machine translation engine which is underlying it. So it starts with what you call a plain vanilla machine translation engine, which is good at translating everything to a reasonably good degree. Maybe if you give it a score, maybe 60 or 70% accuracy. But then the community which is using it improves it. And it's actually based on a very old project called Blogging Portal, which is dead now, unfortunately. But it's not just a question of people submitting individual items of content into the platform. What you do is you attach you basically take feeds from content sources. So if you're interested in, for example, butterfly collecting.
Butterflies, yeah.
Yeah, maybe in France there's a website about butterflies, and in Germany there's a website about butterflies, and in Italy there's a website about butterflies, and they've all got RSS feeds. So you just feed those websites into the platform, and every time there's a new piece of content from one of those sources, it goes into the system and it's automatically classified for you. So you don't have to, the members of the community don't actually have to curate every single piece of content. They just curate the sources, where are good sources of content relevant to our interest. And then the machine will analyze it, classify it according to a high-performance taxonomy using semantic analysis, and do machine translations around it. And then the humans who have, basically done the source curation can then identify the highest quality content. They can say, that particular article is really good. And so basically this was the blogging portal model, which curated over 1,000 sources about EU policy, but it all had to be done manually. And people gave up after a while because they got PhDs. They finished their PhDs, they got married, had kids, got jobs, and they walked away. So, we really have to make the machines do as much as possible and leave the humans to do the most important things, which is identifying the sources which should be curated for the community to begin with, and then identifying the individual pieces of content which are exceptionally good. And then, in addition, correcting the translations if they want to, because they know that if they do, they will actually improve the translation engine. And should this be successful, each community will create the best machine translation engine for their community. And as a whole, the overall machine translation engine underlying this tool will get better, and so will the semantic analysis engine as well, because semantic analysis works. It reads the article and it figures out what the article is about. It automatically tags it, and it makes mistakes. It will make mistakes, and if all the human has to do is say that's a good article, but it's not about pesticides, that's a mistake. He just deletes that tag. The semantic analysis engine will learn from that, and so it's a way of harnessing the power of online communities to crowdsource the improvement, the training of machine translation and semantic analysis. And it sounds like a bit of a mouthful. It's a lot easier when I have a PowerPoint presentation to explain all of that. But trust me, it's going to rock.
Well, I must say, personally, I find it extremely fascinating and a very, very interesting project. So you mentioned your BIOS challenge, and then you said that the Euractiv project, the official one, so to speak, is a bit more advanced or has a different focus. So maybe elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, this is a really interesting project too, actually. It's far more advanced than my project is just an idea with some wireframes attached to it. But this is something that they've actually been piloting for, well, almost since they began. But very recently, they've actually been testing the Commission's own machine translation tool, as well as a private company's machine translation tool, a company called Tilda. They're from Latvia. And it's actually a very interesting idea. And originally this is something which the Euractiv network, because they've got franchises across Europe, something that they could do internally, and they've been testing it internally. But now they actually want to turn it into a platform which other media could join. And essentially what it is, it's going to set up itself as a sort of an alternative for a small number of media. Not everybody will join. A small number of media, an alternative to, or a better alternative really, to press agencies. Reuters, AFP, AP, they currently, a lot of media are republishing content from those three press agencies, which really means it's a great loss of diversity. Instead of having, different media interpreting the news in their own way, they're all just republishing one piece of content written by Reuters.
Yeah, exactly.
All credit to Reuters. I mean, they're a multi-billion euro company, and nobody's going to take that away. But the thing is that if you're a French news magazine, you don't want another French news magazine to take your content. That's copyright theft. You don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. But if a German magazine took your article, translated into German, and published it, you would mind a lot less. And you wouldn't just give it away. But if you were on a platform where you could take their content from German and have it machine translated, and you could publish it in French, you would increase the amount of content that you're producing. You would increase the width and the depth of your coverage at a very, very cost-effective rate. All it requires is a platform which links together the media's content management systems with the machine translation engine. And again, a machine translation engine where the machine translation is presented to a journalist, and they then, or a translator then, corrects the machine translation and localizes, does lots of other things, and the platform learns from those corrections. So we'll have a platform where there's a bunch of news media sharing content across language borders, and in the process training the machine translation engine so it gets better over time. And this is actually pretty neat because media is, as I mentioned before, under an enormous amount of business pressure. The business media, the business model of media is broken. A lot of media are going out of business. They're more and more using press agencies. And this is a way of both helping media, improve their cost effectiveness, improve their competitiveness, improve their revenues. But it also means that national media across Europe will include more content from other national media. So you'll have, French media reporting more about how the same issue is covered in Germany, Italy, Portugal, France, Spain. And, which brings us back to what we were talking at the beginning about how there's a lack of this European public sphere. And so it sort of kills two birds with one stone. And the technologies are there. The machine, we've been testing it here, the machine translation, at least part of it. We'll also need semantic analysis and auto text summary, so we need a combination of technologies. But they all exist. They're all on the market now.
Yeah.
It's just a question of combining them together and integrating them into the content management systems of news media, which isn't as hard as it sounds because you just use APIs, application programming interfaces. Half the media of the world all use WordPress, so it's not that hard. I think this is going to be a really interesting project. It's, as I said, Eureka has been testing this for a while. We had a workshop on it at Future Media Lab back in January, and that was very interesting. It gave us some more input and some more sort of constraints to meet and so forth. But we've got a model now, and we're going to be discussing this at LT Innovate. Well, I won't be, it'll be my colleagues. And we are going to be opening it up. We would like other European media to join us on this journey in creating a platform which will benefit us all. And in fact, it will help benefit Europe too.
And I think it should be quite interesting, especially for the small and medium-sized media, let's say, that don't have a lot of infrastructure for that kind of thing, because it will give them a way to extend their exposure, get known more widely, and sort of leave the national market, maybe find new markets. It's
certainly very useful for whenever any media gets a piece republished somewhere else with credit. Obviously, you hope. It's a big deal. It's always a bit of a victory, and so this is a way of helping media, reach beyond their national borders, and it's also a way of ideas crossing national borders, which is extremely important. But in the end, it really is a question of helping media, improve the coverage of European issues, or of all issues, in fact, in a cost-effective way, because I don't know how much you know about what's going on in America, but the number of newspapers that have gone out of business, the number of journalists who've been let go is horrifying. And
it goes down with increasing speed. It's terrible.
It's really bad. It's a big problem. It's a big problem for democracy, and at a time where Europe has got its own problems, it doesn't need. Europe does not need independent media to also die, because that will not help.
Definitely no.
So it really is. It's a tangled web. It's a tangled set of problems. But this particular set of solutions, as I said at the beginning, there's no one solution to the problem of Europe. But this is just one partial solution to one of the many problems. And I actually think it's got great potential, and it's also awesomely cool technology. I mean, it really is.
It
very
is, right?
Nice,
Yeah. Because it's technically, it has become so easy to sort of take different bits and pieces and put them together sort of in an automated way, I guess. We started with RSS news feeds, but increasingly also APIs. As you said, it becomes much easier to sort of tie things together. And then the only thing that stands in the way then is backwards idea of copyright and the ideas that float around about this ancillary copyright for news publishers. So that could maybe be an issue. I don't know.
Oh, of course, it's absolutely one of the issues. But what you have to remember that is if you're as I said before, if you're a French media, if you join this platform, because there are no other French media on the platform addressing the same audience as you.
Yeah.
So you share your content into this platform. You choose which articles you share. And knowing that the only media who are going to pick it up and use it, they're going to be using a German translation, a Portuguese translation, an English translation, and so on. And they will respect your copyright, which is a shared copyright model. So there'll be a link back to you and so on. But they're not actually taking anything away from you, because they're addressing audiences in Germany, in Portugal, in Spain, and who are not interested in reading your article in French on your French newspaper. So,
exactly.
So that is the key issue here. The thing is that, at the moment you've got a tiny handful of press agencies, 2 English, 1 French, who are pumping out content that everybody uses. But there's a whole bunch of syndication-ready content that is hidden behind these language barriers. And we're just going to drill a hole in that barrier and let media, that participating media who reach the same quality threshold and respect each other's copyright, we're going to let those media, tap that content. And it's going to enrich them. It's going to help them save their business model, and it's also going to enrich the coverage of issues in the media. It's a lot better than everybody publishing the same article from Reuters.
Which is what happens, today, basically, yeah. Maybe not necessarily for the podcast, but just out of curiosity, the idea behind the platform, is it also to provide a mechanism for, I don't know, payment, licensing, or is it mainly about the technical things and the multilingual aspect at the moment?
Well, the idea is, when you want to do something like this, what you want to do is build a system which will be commercially sustainable.
Sure.
So, somebody has to somebody has to build the platform, somebody has to manage the platform. And so we've got a business model for that now. This is what we've been working on the last few months. And the idea would be that media who join this platform, they pay a yearly fee to have access to it, just as they pay a yearly or a monthly fee to Reuters, AP, and AFP as well.
Yeah, a subscription. Yeah,
it's a subscription model. It will be a service, software as a service, or actually a content service that's piped directly into your CMS. The idea is that you're a journalist in one of these media and you start writing about an article. The first thing you do is you put a few keywords into your CMS, and it automatically finds you articles on that topic written by other media on the platform, and you can mine them. You can republish them or use the content in there in your own content to make your content better. So it's allowing media to pool their journalistic research as well. And what that will allow is different media to specialize a bit more, because at the moment everybody writes the same 500 to 800 word article every day about when Holland met Merkel. But if if you're in this club, maybe you can republish somebody else's 500-word article, which just basically gives you the breakdown of what happened when Holland met Merkel, and then you spend your time writing something a bit more original, a different slant on it, and other members of the media will pick that up and use that. So you get more diversity of journalism, diversity of voice, and greater creativity and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Extremely interesting times we live in. Crazy times, but very interesting.
Yeah, we do, don't we? Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just ask one final devil's advocate question.
Go for it.
Do you think people will embrace that, or will most people just say, English enough is fine, why bother? And I would hate that to happen. It's a purely devil's advocate question.
Well, I can only agree with you that I would hate it to happen, and I'm working on projects like this because I want to allow at least an alternative to exist. And I think the answer is that many people will say, I understand English, so I don't need this. But then they're missing out on so much content. I mentioned before the Blog and Portal project, which was the source of all the ideas here. This was an informal bunch of people who were collectively known as Eurobloggers, people who were blogging about the EU. And they said, wouldn't it be great if we could find all of our stuff, And so some people built this engine to basically curate this content. And in the end, it was curating over 1,000 sources of content. And in the database, there's over 320,000 individual pieces of content, most of which have been tagged manually, or maybe half have been tagged manually. But what's really interesting is the language profile. I think it's like, I've written a blog post about this, but it was years ago. I did an analysis. But there are over 20 languages covered there, right? Now, quantity is not everything. Quality is important too. And as I said before, somebody writing in Latvian or Hungarian may tackle the same problem in a different way, simply because they grew up Hungarian and the language means they tackle, they look at a problem in a different way. But that insight, that perspective on that problem is hidden to everybody who doesn't understand Hungarian. And if you say, English is enough, what you're saying is, knowing English, there's enough content for me to read 24/7, which is true.
Precisely, yes.
But it doesn't mean that you're reading the best content. It just means that you've got enough content to get through. And the idea of being given even more content to read is just, forget it. I don't have the time to read what there is now. But just because you're reading stuff in English doesn't mean you're reading the best stuff there is to offer on a topic. And
that's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I mentioned Hungarian in particular. Hungary is a really interesting place. I've actually met quite a few Hungarian people, and they do seem to be quite creative. And I'm wondering whether that's a function of culture or language, but I don't really think you can separate the two. And I really would hate that to be lost, and everybody just to start talking in English, because I think Europe would lose the potential of being more innovative that we currently have. And if we don't tap that potential, we'll regret it one day. Because the technology will get there eventually. We just need to give it a push.
I think there's not much to be added there. You've been listening to episode 21 of LangFM, an interview podcast where I meet guests at the intersection of language and technology. My guest this time, European communications strategist Mathew Lowry. You can find Mathew on Twitter as @Mathew Lowry with only one T, and many other places around the web. Also, you should really go to www.langfm.audio and check out the show notes for this episode for additional information and loads of interesting links. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, why not subscribe, leave me a review on iTunes, or share it with your friends. Thank you.